to Turkish-American Hour. I'm Gökşin Kerry. Dr. Baran Kilical is in our studios today. Baran, will you tell us about your childhood and your background? How did you decide to be a doctor?
The story begins actually in Turkey. I was born in Ankara in 1976, and growing up there, my grandfather is a general surgeon, and he would take me to his clinic that he would run, and once in a while into the operating room, and I would get to see what he does for a living. And so I became quite enthusiastic about medicine way back then. But as time went on and I grew up, I kind of lost interest in it and wanted to pursue other things. Most of my friends were in computer science and things like that, so I kind of strayed from it for a little bit. But then, seeing a couple accidents and seeing people have heart attacks and whatnot, I felt quite helpless and said, hey, you know, I need to be able to help my fellow man, and decided to become a paramedic. So I started working in college, working in the ambulance, and had a little bit of experience that way, and kind of sparked my interest back into medicine. And so I changed gears again from computer science and went into medicine, and then pursued cardiology and then electrophysiology from there.
Oh, that was very nice. Well, tell us about heart disease. How do you prevent heart disease?
So one of the hot topics now especially is, it's the #1 killer in the United States and in quite a few parts of the world as well. Cancers get a lot of attention, HIV gets a lot of attention. They're a bit more glamorous topics, and they're very important topics, but heart disease still remains the #1 killer. As a matter of fact, it is almost more deadly than all the cancers put together. There are a lot of things people can do to prevent heart disease. Unfortunately, they're very difficult because they're lifestyle changes. So blood pressure, cholesterol, obesity, reducing other risk factors like smoking and substance abuse. Eliminating all of these would dramatically reduce somebody's risk of a heart attack. Unfortunately, all of these are very difficult to do. I think that the biggest one, though, is obesity, because as people we've gotten used to the easy foods, the fast foods, the fast lifestyle where we're overstressed, don't have time for physical activity and exercise, and we work and we eat. That also leads to hypertension, high cholesterol, diabetes, and all those other problems. So it becomes this vicious cycle that just feeds on itself, and then eventually ends up in a heart attack, unfortunately.
And what is atrial fibrillation?
Now you're getting into a topic that is of great interest to me. Atrial fibrillation is one of the family of heart rhythm disturbances, and these are all electrical short circuits, if you want to think of them that way, in the heart. It is a disease that can affect people who are young and people who are old, and if we are lucky enough to live to be old enough and live to 80, 90, about 30% of us will develop atrial fibrillation in our lifetime. It is not necessarily a life-threatening problem, but it's more of a quality of life issue, because with atrial fibrillation, people can feel terrible. Some people can feel their heart racing, feel dizzy, even pass out, feel nauseated. And there's a second part to this, is that it is one of the causes of stroke.
Well, how do you prevent from this fibrillation?
So atrial fibrillation is sometimes we just can't prevent it, and it just happens, and we don't quite understand why it happens. So the short circuit that forms in the top chambers of the heart, called the atria, can be because of alcohol, of toxins, substance abuse, but that I think is a minority of them. A majority of them, we don't quite understand why it happens. Also, things such as heart failure and enlarging of the heart chambers can trigger atrial fibrillation, but a majority of the people that we see don't necessarily have those things.
Well, can you tell us about the sudden cardiac arrest? What are the symptoms for it?
So sudden cardiac arrest typically is also another heart rhythm disturbance, but that has to do with the bottom chambers, the ventricles of the heart, going too fast. It can also occur because the chambers don't beat at all or go too slow, but a majority of the time it's because of something called ventricular tachycardia or ventricular fibrillation, when the bottom chambers go so fast they don't have enough time to fill and actually squeeze blood out to the organs that need it. That short circuit, we don't also quite understand, but there are many manifestations. So the younger people who get this are because of things we call channelopathies. So, or structural heart defects. They will get this short circuit and die from that. The other class of people are the people who've already had a heart attack and their heart is weakened from it, and they are also at an increased risk. So one of the key things we push is, what is the ejection fraction? How well does your heart squeeze? If that number is below 35%, we know that those patients in particular are at a dramatically increased risk, a 9-fold increased risk for sudden cardiac arrest. But the good news is we have lots of options for these patients. If it's a structural issue, then we can go ahead and do catheter ablations. If it's a channelopathy, sometimes medications help. But a majority of the time, we end up putting defibrillators in, which are devices that can detect these heart rhythm disturbances and treat them.
Is it a heart operation?
So the operation, people think of it as a big surgery, and it's more of a minor procedure. It is, here's an actual, I brought some of these along with me. So here's what the defibrillator looks like. They're very small, they're very light, and when the patients come in, we make a small cut about this big, and you can see over here, we make a small cut just as pictured there, and then afterwards, just kind of tunnel on top of the muscle, but underneath the skin, not an open heart surgery or anything like that. And then we make a small hole underneath the collarbone, and through that little hole, we put a wire down into the heart. Attach it to this device, close it with some stitches, and most people go home the same day or at most the following day, and they resume their normal activities within 4 weeks.
That's interesting.
So what this device will do is it will look at every heartbeat, and if it detects that fast heartbeat, it will actually deliver a shock, which is not a very pleasant feeling, but it's better than the alternative because it's a life-saving therapy.
Yeah. And what are the symptoms for the heart rhythm disorders?
So the heart rhythm disorders can be quite varied. So the benign ones, the ones that are more quality of life issues, such as the atrial fibrillation, atrial flutters, things like that, most people just either feel their heart racing, or they say my heart skipped a beat, or palpitations. They might get dizzy, they might feel nauseated and tired. The more serious things like ventricular tachycardia can also just feel dizzy and fatigued and pass out, but majority of the time it's just sudden cardiac death without any symptoms.
And what causes for this?
So the sudden cardiac arrests are because it could be multiple options. First, it would be channelopathies, things that we're born with, where the heart electrical system does not work right and creates a substrate for fast heart rhythm disturbances like ventricular tachycardia. Another one would be structural problems, such as somebody who's had a heart attack and has a weak heart. We know that those patients are at an increased risk, 9-fold increased risk as well.
Well, the subject is a very delicate subject, and it's really lifesaver. And we're so happy to have a Turkish-American in this field. Is there any message for the viewers and young doctors? Would you like to say anything?
To go into medicine, you really have to want it, and a lot of people will tell you don't do it. It's a tough road. There's no money. Medicare is ruining things. Insurance are ruining things, but it's still a fabulous profession, and when you go home at night, it's a really good feeling. So if you love it, you should pursue it.
I can see this red dress.
So this is the American Heart Association Red Dress campaign, and this was a pin that they started putting out to increase awareness that we typically associate heart attacks with men, but actually women are at equal risk, if not some in age groups, even maybe increased risk. So most women before the age of 50, or roughly when they hit menopause, are at a lower risk than men for heart attacks. But once they hit menopause or around age 50, they rapidly catch up, and that it has been an ignored population.
Is there any story, a good memory that you would like to share with us and our viewers?
My favorite part of medicine are the patient stories, and patients do fantastic things and also sometimes very funny things. One of them was a gentleman, we put a defibrillator in one of these devices that does the shock, and he had gone home, and he was sitting at home watching his TV, and he developed this heart rhythm disturbance that would have led to him dying, but the device saw what it was and delivered a shock. He thought somebody shot him. He lives on a farm.
Oh my gosh.
So he called 911 and called the police and said, somebody shot me. And so of course they brought him into the hospital, and we checked his device, said actually it had just saved your life and nobody is out to get you.
So the story is a nice ending story.
For him, luckily.
Wonderful. Dr. Baran Kilical, thank you very much being with us here today.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a fantastic time.
You're welcome. Thank you for watching Turkish American Hour. I'm Gökşin Kerry. Goodbye. Hoşça kalın.